Good afternoon, everyone. My name is George McGaffey. I'm the president of the Green Valley Democrats, and I would personally like to thank you for coming and joining us. This is one of the most important offices in our state, and so I want you to really get to know these candidates well. This is the most important thing we can do, is make sure we share this information we get from these two candidates today with our neighbors and friends.
Welcome everyone to this discussion of the Democratic primary candidates who are running for Arizona's Secretary of State. As George said, I'm Dylan Smith, the editor and publisher of the Tucson Sentinel, your local independent nonprofit watchdog news. I'm honored to be asked to moderate this public forum of the primary candidates. I'm pleased to see so many folks turned out for this afternoon. It's a lovely day out, and I really thank you for coming to be a part of this. I've asked each of the candidates today to approach today as a spirited conversation rather than a formal sort of debate with a lot of structure, as we've got a whole lot of very important topics to cover, and we had to put a little bit of a time limit on some of their answers, and make sure that they each get the chance to have their say on a lot of these topics that our team at the Sentinel and so many of you out in the public have suggested. Because time can go by quickly when we're discussing these really complex issues, let's respect the candidates' time as well as the other audience members, and please refrain from sustained clapping, cheering, other applause, or boos during the debate, except for now, as I briefly introduce them. State Representative Reginald Boulding is the Democratic leader in the Arizona House of Representatives. Boulding has led the charge against voting restrictions in the legislature over the past 8 years. Outside of the chamber, he is the founder and executive director of one of the largest voting rights organizations in the state, responsible for registering more than 50,000 Arizonans to vote, and in 2020, successfully suing the state of Arizona in federal court to extend the voter registration deadline to allow more people to sign up. Adrian, a former prosecutor in Colorado, Maricopa County, and the Arizona Attorney General's office. In 2016, he became the first Democrat elected as Maricopa County Recorder in 50 years, and the first Latino to hold countywide office in Maricopa County. So we're going to spend a whole lot of our time digging into the specifics of what each of you want to accomplish if you're elected as the Secretary of State, how you would realistically get that done. We'll talk about a lot of the challenges that Arizona's election processes are facing, of course. The audience wants to hear about your qualifications, why you're the best candidate for them. Before we jump into the questions, we've got a lot of questions. Each of you will have the chance to briefly introduce yourselves to the folks here today. Reginald Boulding, tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're running, why you are qualified to oversee the complex authority of the Arizona Secretary of State.
Awesome. Well, first I want to say good afternoon. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Reginald Boulding. I have the honor, privilege, and pleasure of serving as the Democratic leader of the largest Democratic caucus since 1966 in the state legislature. You helped make that happen. And also, as mentioned, I lead one of the largest civic engagement groups working on voting rights here in the state of Arizona. We're in 3 of the largest counties, really making sure that voters get registered, they turn out the vote, and they have the ability to advocate on issues that matter most to them. But before I tell you a little bit more about what I do, I want to tell you about who I am. Like more than 50% of Arizonans, I was born and raised outside of Arizona in a small town in Ohio. There I was raised by a single mom who had a dream that her 3 young boys could do and be whatever they wanted to. She believed in this simple idea that one generation should do and fight for that next generation so they can actually have the ability to achieve whatever they could accomplish. For me, while my mom never had more than a high school education, she made it her dream and her push that her 3 young boys will. Myself, I hold a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a doctoral candidate at ASU. I've been in the fight and in the charge. 15 years ago, I turned down a full-ride law school scholarship to move to Arizona to become a special education teacher. Because what I knew was that there were so many kids in our communities who had access and opportunity, and they needed to make sure that they had someone who could stand up and fight for them every single day. And in the state, what I saw in the classroom was a state legislature that was not providing the resources for our kids in our classrooms. So I said there's two things that you can do. You can either allow that to continue to happen, allow our kids to be shortchanged, or you can roll up your sleeves and get to work. So in 2014, I decided to run for office, and I've been elected the last 8 years serving the downtown Phoenix, South Phoenix area. During my time in the state legislature, I've been able to pass more bills than any other Democrat over those last 8 years. If you're a homeless veteran in the state of Arizona, you can walk into any MVD and get a free state ID, and that was a bill that I helped write into law. If you're a foster student and you want access to your records, whether it's your birth certificate or your social security card, because you don't have access to that, you now have the ability to do that. That's a bill that I wrote in law. You know, what I've been spending my time doing over the last 8 years is fighting for issues that matter most to us. Taking the fight to Republicans when they try to take away women's right to choose. Trying to fight against Republicans when they're making it more difficult for us to stand up for workers' issues. And making sure that we have a strong public education system. I'm excited about this office, I'm excited about this role, and what you'll see throughout this debate is that I absolutely have some of the most foundational skills that you need in order to be the next Secretary of State. With regards to qualifications, there's no one that has more experience in this race than myself. As the leader of one of the largest civic engagement organizations, as the top Democrat in the state legislature, and someone with a coalition and vision to make things happen. I'm excited for the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Reginald.
Our democracy depends on you. We've never had a more serious moment in the history of this republic. Barring the Civil War, we're at the precipice of either losing our democracy, and therefore our republic, or using the very election systems that we are trying to defend to protect and defend this very democracy. My name's Adrian. I come from a family that has been in these valleys and up and down these creeks for a long, long time. I had an ancestor who heard Mass given by Father Kino in 1695 in Janos, Chihuahua. I used to ride up and down what was called the old Tucson Highway because we started in Nogales, and that's what we called it when we were coming north. Before the I-19 existed. I remember only when one of those tailing mountains was out there when I was a kid. The bottom line is this: Arizona is as much a part of me as I am a part of it. My grandfather and 4 of his brothers, 5 of my great-grandparents' kids, went on to serve the United States of America in World War II. My grandfather, Dino, was the mayor of Nogales for a few terms back when I was a kid. In fact, he got elected on my 9th birthday. You can say public service has been in my blood the whole time. And after high school, I started out at that school north of the Gila River, which shall not be named, down here south of the Gila River. And I had a little too much fun. And so I went to be a counselor at a private high school and then enlisted in the Marine Corps. And I voluntarily did so, knowing that being at the tip of the military spear in 1992, between the 2 storms in those deserts, it was possible that I'd have to give up my life for this nation. That's how important this democracy and this republic is to me. That's the story of me, up until the point where I decided to turn my life upside down again. I was 46 years old. I'd been practicing law for a decade and a half plus. I bought a house, was raising kids and doing all that stuff. And I saw that people were denied the right to vote in Maricopa County. 4, 5, 6 hour long lines. The foundation of our democracy was cracking. And I gave up all of it to run for Maricopa County Recorder. In those 4 years, we registered 500,000 more voters onto the voter rolls, making Maricopa the 2nd largest jurisdiction in the country. And in those 4 years, we saw an increase of ballots cast of 600,000. That's why Joe Biden won Arizona, because of the work we did opening up access. We actually did the work on the ground. We actually administered the elections. And every time I hear the word cyber ninja, I smile. Why? Because it stands as one of the most highly scrutinized, if not the most highly scrutinized election in Arizona history, in American history, and we passed every test with flying colors. I'm very proud of the work that we did. I'm proud of the bipartisan team that I built. I'm proud that we have vote centers now in Pima County, thanks to me becoming Chief Deputy Recorder when I was done up there. And I'm also very proud of the other work that we did that I'm sure we'll discuss. My name's Adrian, folks. And with your help, I'll be Arizona's next Secretary of State. Thank you.
Did Donald Trump really win Arizona? Was there widespread fraud? How are you sure? Are you confident in Arizona's election system? And really, how could it be more secure and accurate? You've got 2 minutes.
Well, that's a heck of a question for 2 minutes, but I'll tell you what. I was on that ballot in 2020 in Maricopa County, and on that ballot I earned what would end up becoming nearly my 2.5 millionth vote. That's right. When we think about this office, we have to think about experience and electability. My experience running the election I'll talk about. But I've already had almost 2.5 million votes cast for me in Maricopa County. Think about this. That election was not stolen. How do I know? I ran it. How do I also know? Out of almost 2 million ballots cast in my race, I was just over 4,500 short. And the minute it became statistically impossible for me to win, I didn't complain. I didn't whine and cry. I didn't go running home to mama and say they stole the election. I stood up, I called my counterpart, and I invited him into a tour so we could have a peaceful transition of power. The fascism and authoritarianism that we see rising in America, fed by misinformation and disinformation, fed by Republican talking points that divide us as a nation as to the single most important part of our country. Our elections are the golden thread that run right through the middle of the fabric of this nation. And if you pull that thread out like they're trying to do, the entire fabric disappears. They want us so divided against one another that only some folks will have power. We've seen it. We've seen fundamental rights for the first time in our history in a draft form so far, getting stripped away from more than half of our citizens. The right for you to choose what to do with your own body. We've seen them try to suppress the vote. We've seen them destroy our public school systems in favor of their pro-profit school systems and widgetizing our kids. Was the election stolen? No. And I know because I ran that election. I built that team. I built that system when I was Maricopa County Recorder. I'm the one responsible for the fact that the Cyber Ninjas didn't find anything wrong. And I'm the reason why we need to make sure to protect democracy here, especially in this office.
Thank you. Reginald Boulding, pretty much same question. Did Donald Trump win the 2020 election? Was there widespread fraud?
Absolutely not.
And what I want to get into, more than your reaction to that, but could our election system be more secure and more accurate?
Look, to answer your simple question, absolutely not. We have free, fair, safe, and secure elections here in this country, here in this state. And the reality is our election system has never been more partisan than it is today. It's no longer about how do I ensure we're doing the best for democracy. It's about how do I ensure that my team wins, even if they're willing to break down the system in order to try to prove that point. The reality is that there is a coordinated effort going on around this country in battleground states. And Arizona is at the top of that list, in which Donald Trump and those folks who support Donald Trump are looking to put election deniers in Secretary of State offices and other election offices here in this country. And what we know is that they're going to try to do in 2024 what they couldn't do in 2020, which is to actually steal the election. This race could not be more important. Making sure that we have someone that could win this race here in Arizona literally will be the difference on whether or not we potentially have another president, a Democratic president in the White House, to be quite frank. Because what I know is that my Republican component in this race, Mark Fincham, he has gone on record and said that in 2020, if he was Secretary of State, he would have ensured that Donald Trump won, indicating that he would have somehow changed the results to ensure that voters don't get the opportunity to have their voices heard. The reality is, every single cycle, we have to make sure that we're looking to improve the process. Are there things that can be improved upon? I absolutely believe so. You know, it shouldn't be easier for you to know whether or not you're getting a package in the mail from Amazon than it is whether or not you're getting your ballot. Under my administration as Secretary of State, you'll know exactly when your ballot has been sent, when it's been received, when it's been sent back, and when it's been tabulated. And that's a system that you have to have for the entire state of Arizona. That's a system that you have to have, and that's the confidence that you have to build within Arizonans. Because the only way that you ensure that these election deniers know that we have a free and fair election is to put systems and processes in place that will make it undeniable that our elections were safe and secure.
Thank you. In a little bit of the same vein, Reginald, just a few years ago, under a previous Secretary of State, there was a lawsuit brought by a coalition of voter rights groups against the office to make sure that Arizona's voter rolls are accessible public records that can be reviewed by the press, by residents, to ensure that there's no discrimination, manipulation, no skullduggery going on. How can the Secretary of State's office be even more transparent?
You know, look, the reality is that we have to make sure that the Secretary of State's office provides an opportunity for voters to know that there is confidence in the system. And what we've seen across this country is many Secretary of States and their offices, particularly in those states that have taken upon the partisanship, they've had a concerted effort to work with the legislature to purge rolls. And particularly, they're not just looking to purge the rolls, they're looking to purge the rolls from a specific type of person in a specific community at a specific time. And what we know here in Arizona, whether you're in a community of color, whether you're in a tribal area, whether you're a senior, whether it's more difficult for you to have the ability to have access to our elections, we know that they're coming for your votes. That's why in 2020, what I decided to do was the same thing that I decided to do in 2021. I challenged the voter suppression law that I know would made it more difficult for Native Americans here in the state of Arizona, a law that would have suppressed and that would have taken off nearly 150,000 people from our vote by mail system. And I'm currently in federal court challenging them to make sure that they don't have the ability to do that. I was successful in 2020 when I took the state to federal court, and I feel very confident that we'll be able to do it again in 2021. With regards to transparency, what our Secretary of State's office can do, first and foremost, I believe we have a solid, transparent system. But what we can't sacrifice is people's personal safety for transparency. Because what I am seeing and what I've heard is that you have Republicans who are looking to go through voter rolls, and they're hoping to do door-to-door sweeps to, quote, verify people who are actually on the rolls. That's no more than voter intimidation, just like we've seen in the 1960s, and we can't allow that to happen. And I'm looking forward to making sure that everyone's data is protected as the next Secretary of State, and we have a transparent system that allows for people to know that our system is safe.
Thank you so much. Before I answer the question, I want to acknowledge and appreciate that Mr. Boulding has endorsed my ballot tracking system that we created in Maricopa County that allows you to get an automatic ballot email or text message when your ballot comes to you and when it returns to the election department so that you can know that your ballot is going to get counted. So thank you very much for that. As far as transparency, look, there's a whole bunch of specific things that we can do. And I think folks are looking for specifics. First and foremost, we can simplify the language in the elections procedures manual so everybody can know what the rules of the road are. This thing, just the last few years under the Reagan administration, and it's continued under the Hobbs administration, has become this, third page of footnotes and case law and statutes, and the whole thing is just a big rigmarole. This is the rule book by which our 15 counties run elections. And if it was in plain language and people could understand it, that's the kind of transparency that people could look at and say, okay, I know how this process works. Right now, there's a lot of misunderstanding because it's not easy to understand. We can do that. That's not hard. Additionally, we can make sure that our campaign finance websites are up to date. Think about it. Candidates all over the place file their stuff in PDF form and all this other. You can't search who's financing different candidates. You can't figure that out. Why in the world, with the technology that we have, can't you go in and find out who's my neighbor funding? Search for the funder and see who they've donated to. It's public record. It should be easily accessible. And that kind of transparency is what people want.
Who is paying for our candidates? Who is paying for our politicians? Why in the world can't we have a simple system that you can cross-check and index and do that sort of stuff with? That's what the campaign finance improvements and transparency could offer. And insofar as protecting people's rights but still being transparent, well, this past week we put out a new policy. And as Secretary of State, we're exploring the idea of whether we can make, pending this crazy Roe thing that's happening, Roe v. Wade thing, whether we can add, not just to judges and prosecutors and cops, to protected addresses. But we've also already got victims of domestic violence there with protected addresses. We might need to put abortion providers, advocates for those services, and women who've actually had the procedures to protect their addresses from the same kinds of people who've been hunting down doctors and clinics for such a long time. These are the kinds of things, again, and I think we agree here, we have to protect folks that need that protection. In this new potential post-Roe world, the Secretary's office might play a key role in that. I'd encourage you to look up that policy that we put out this week.
Thank you. Reginald, run down for us the ways in which the legislature has made voting in Arizona more difficult, especially the last few years. How will that affect this ongoing election? And if nothing changes, the upcoming 2024 cycle that includes a pretty important presidential race?
Absolutely. So, you know, the state legislature has done a number of things to make it more difficult for people to access democracy. At the base, that's what we're talking about, giving people the ability to access democracy. And what I often say is that if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. And the reality is voting rights have been on the menu. We've seen a legislature that has made it more difficult for people to register to vote. Over the past years, there's been legislation that would actually criminalize individuals if you're not a county government from registering people to vote. We've seen the legislature create mechanisms in place that would make it more difficult for your vote to actually count once it's been cast, along with the cyber ninjas and things of that nature, what we've seen. And we've also have seen a mechanism in place for our legislature to take away our vote by mail system. Look, 90% of Arizonans choose to vote by mail. If you look back at our data in 2010, 60% of Arizonans voted by mail. At that point in time, every single statewide office was held by Republicans. There was a supermajority in the state legislature with Republicans. And in 10 years, voting rights organizations like the ones that I created, we were able to increase the vote by mail system from 60% to 90%. Now let's take a look at Arizona. Now, our statewide offices, 50% of those statewide offices are held by Democrats. In fact, if you look at our congressional delegation, there's 11 people who we send to Congress. 7 of them are Democrats. Our state legislature, we have the closest margins in the House and the Senate since 1966. There's a 1 vote difference in the House, a 1 vote difference in the Senate. And what that has done is it has invoked a level of I would say, fear in my Republican colleagues. That a state that they could just pass any piece of legislation. They could get away with anything like SB 1070. So now they actually have to negotiate. They have to actually make a case about their ideas and debate those things. And what we have to make sure that we do is we not only have a Secretary of State and the Secretary of State's office that is understanding the state legislature, because the Secretary of State is the Lieutenant Governor. So you have to have someone who understands the state legislature. And as the top-ranking Democrat, there's no one on this stage that understands the legislature like myself. And you also have to make sure that you have a legislature that's going to protect and work with the Secretary of State's office to protect your right to vote.
Same question.
Thank you. So some of the ways they did this started a little bit back. Interestingly and ironically, it was the Republicans who were first very, very successful at going out and getting their ballots collected up by their neighbors and their PCs and bringing them in. And then when Democrats started doing it better, they created this boogeyman of ballot harvesting and turned it into a felony. Right? This happened back in 2015, 2016 timeframe. Turning the permanent early vote list into just a regular early vote list. Well, I think that was really problematic because I think for the folks that signed up for a permanent early vote list, you signed a contract with the state of Arizona to get your ballot delivered to you permanently, and that's changed, unfortunately.
And I think the other thing is recently the added burdens for more information to be turned in when you register to vote, additional proof of citizenship. It's an issue we dealt with in Maricopa County. When I first became a recorder, we had 96,000 voter registration forms that were in a closet, literally being held because of this proof of citizenship stuff. And we ended up registering tens of thousands of those voters. In fact, one voter had missed 17 different opportunities to vote because of that. Here's what's interesting. Some people will say that the expanded early vote list and all these people now voting by mail happened because of what the legislature did. Nothing could be further from the truth. It happened because of a global pandemic, and even Donald Trump himself was soliciting folks to vote in the mail in June of 2020. It happened because political parties and activists and organizations went out there and got more people signed up. The legislature didn't do that. One thing the legislature did do when I was county recorder, in reaction to one of the lawsuits that happened against my office in 2018, we were curing ballot signatures for folks. There was no law specifically when that was supposed to stop. And so because of all this, they wanted to make it move forward, they wanted to make it move backwards, whatever. Michelle Ugenti-Rita, one of our opponents on the Republican side, sponsors a bill to codify my policy from Maricopa County. So anybody who knows how the legislature works has to understand how legislators work. They get influenced by lobbyists behind the scenes, and even Michelle Ugenti herself will create one of my policies as a statute and turn it into Arizona law because the Republicans thought it was a Republican idea. It was my idea. It was my policy in Maricopa County, and we helped get tens of thousands of votes cured because we extended the signature curing deadline for non-signatures and mismatched signatures. That's getting stuff done on the positive side. So while they have every once in a while come up with something good, it's probably because it was my idea first.
Please explain in 1 minute the difference between the role of the Secretary of State's office and the 15 elected county recorders in Arizona.
Well, the roles are very clear. The elections are run at the counties. The counties have 3 people that run elections, 3 entities. The County Board of Supervisors is your county election board. The election director, appointed by the board, sometimes by recorder, depends on the county, is the actual on-the-ground administrator. And the county recorder is the registrar of voters and is in charge of early voting. The Secretary of State is the regulator. The Secretary goes and trains all of these folks and gets them certified through one single type of training, does the elections procedures manual, so they all have all the same rule book, and advocates for counties at the legislature so they can get the kinds of funds and support that they need across all of Arizona. And remember, you got to know how the counties work. I wasn't just the county recorder in Maricopa County, but when I was done with my term, I came down here to Pima County and worked for Gabriela Cáceres-Kelly as her chief deputy for the first 100 days of her administration. That's why you have vote centers now. Anyone can vote anywhere on election day because of this system that we brought from Maricopa County, and hopefully you'll have that ballot tracking system that we created as well. But counties like Greeley County, in the Democratic primary, they're only going to have about 8,000 voters. So you go from millions in Maricopa to just a few in Greeley. You got to know these systems well, like I do, if you're going to serve as Secretary of State to understand how to help those counties.
Essentially the same question, Reginald, but because he gave a pretty good rundown of how things work, is there anything that should be changed in that, and briefly?
The most important thing with regards to the Secretary of State's office is that you oversee elections. So you have to have the ability to work with the 15 county recorders. You have to have the ability to bring people in a room together, to get them bought into an idea, and to execute that idea. You have to be a coalition builder. And essentially, that's been the story of my entire life. As the top-ranking Democrat in the House of Representatives, my job is to work with a coalition of Democrats, negotiate with the governor's office, negotiate with the speaker, negotiate with the Senate president to execute on issues that matter. As the co-founder and executive director of a large voting rights organization, my job is to build a coalition of people that can get behind an idea of how do we execute when we're registering people to vote and we're turning folks out to vote. And I think that's the reason why you're seeing so many people in this state endorsing and supporting our campaign. From the mayor of Tucson, to the mayor of Flagstaff, to the mayor of Tempe, former Congressman Ron Barber, to the top Latino organization, civic engagement organization in the state, Living United for Change. They're endorsing our campaign. Just nationally, an organization called Move On. They just named their 4 pro-democracy champions who they'll be fighting for this year. Stacey Abrams, Beto O'Rourke, and myself. It's extremely important that you have someone who doesn't say, I did it. It was me. I did this. I solved Arizona's problems. Because the reality is, it works the opposite way. And we can get into, if it's going to be about me, we could talk about the exact things that my opponent did while he was county recorder. Because if you notice, he only talks about the 2020 election. And when you place so much emphasis on yourself as an individual, you don't bring in a coalition of people. And as the Secretary of State, as the chief election officer for this state, you have to bring people in. You have to make sure that people understand what's working. And it's extremely important. And that's why we're excited about this race and excited about the coalition that we're building from our supporters on tribal nations to our supporters in every other part of the state. And that's why we're excited.
Talking about a coalition, do you support the Arizonans for Fair Elections initiative?
So that's a great question.
And it's a complex proposal. There's a lot to that. Are there any portions that you don't support or you think should have been a little bit different?
So, that's a great question. And it's also a question that I think is extremely important for people to know. That initiative is actually something that I helped create. It's an initiative that I actually am fundraising the money for right now to do. Because what I know is not just about me. It's not about one elected official. It's about how do we ensure that we have the protections for every Arizonan. That initiative that we have people getting signatures for here in Tucson and Flagstaff and Yuma, people are behind that Fair Elections ballot initiative because they know there's not one person that can take away your rights. I believe that ballot initiative plays a significant role, especially when you have a state legislature who wants to decide whether or not your votes are going to count. When a state legislature wants to decide whether or not they certify an election. When the state legislature wants to raise the campaign finance limits because they want to make sure that corporations can buy elected officials and not actually people. That's one of the reasons why I helped actually write the Fair Elections ballot initiative. Look, my entire career has been about bringing people together and fighting for Arizona. Over the last 8 years as an elected leader, over the last 14 years as an educator, from my time as an instructor at Arizona State University, to my time as the managing director of one of the top education organizations in this country, to my time as a special education teacher in the classroom, I know that's what it takes, a coalition, and it takes a leader who's willing to lead at different times, and that's what I've always done here.
Thank you. Adrian Fontes, does the Fair Elections initiative go far enough?
Well, so far as the Fair Elections Initiative, I think it goes far enough. I do think that there's a couple of things that are not bad, per se, but I wonder about them as an election administrator, you got to ask. For example, taking ballots that are postmarked on Election Day and not actually arrived in a space on Election Day. Having practiced law for a long time and having looked at timelines and schedules and calendars, we have to have finality. And this is maybe not a popular position, but I actually have run elections. I actually know how these systems work. And if you're going to put a deadline on something, you got to have a deadline on it. We know that letters can get caught in the back of trucks and things like this happen. How far are we going to extend that? Are we denying folks the right to vote, or are we just prolonging the inevitable? I'm not 100% sure that particular provision, out of the dozens of different provisions that are in there, is something that as an administrator I would agree with. Fundamentally, it makes a lot of sense. But I think there's something that I want to go back to, and this is really interesting. The idea of I and I and I. Mr. Boulding said that he as secretary would bring people in and have them buy into an idea. That's not how the secretary is supposed to support the counties. The secretary is supposed to sit down and shut up and help them do their jobs better the way they want to do it. The counties run elections, not the state. You have to know this from having been there and having done that. You don't bring people to the table and sell them on your idea. You listen to each of the individual counties. Some have enormous indigenous reservations. Some of them have very, very heavily dense core urban areas. They're all very different. And they don't just come to you so that you can sell them an idea. You got to listen to them and support them. And that's how knowing how these systems works is a big, big, big difference. Because there's some technical stuff and there's some big stuff. And if you've never actually done it, you're just running for an office.
And you know, Dylan, that's the key difference.
Will we be able to respond?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. That's the key difference between myself and my opponent. Leadership. Leadership is acting when you know that there's someone or you know that there's something that needs to be done. Leadership is not waiting to see what issues at play and trying to respond to it. My opponent's talking about the 2020 election, the cyber ninjas, responding to an issue that occurred. You know, with regards to
which issue did the cyber ninjas identify? What was that issue?
What was
the cyber ninjas specific issue?
So I know that you like to interrupt folks, but let's.
Well, you're making an allegation.
I know. I mean, being Secretary of State, you have to make sure you have the poise to actually debate, right? So one of the most important things that you have to do is you have to lead. You have to make sure that you are creating a vision. And as the Secretary of State, we have a vision. Right now here in the state of Arizona, 15%, less than 15% of 18-year-olds are actually registered to vote. Less than 18%. And when we think about turnout in our elections, that's a travesty. So as Secretary of State, the first thing that I'll do is I'll partner with the Superintendent of Public Instruction to make sure that every single high school has voter registration forms so students, upon time of graduation, they can get registered to vote. That's vision. As Secretary of State, one of the things that I also know is many people in our communities, they don't know the difference between their U.S. Senator and their state senator, their congressman and their councilperson. So leading the office as Secretary of State, we'll make sure that we're having advocacy and one of the largest constituent-based organizations that are talking to people about our election systems to get them engaged, because we can't tell people to get fired up about issues when they don't know what elected leaders should be doing. Tackling corruption, making sure we have one of the most robust campaign finance systems that this system has all seen. And I'm glad, Mr. Fontes, that you agree with my idea from previous debates that we should know who's funding our elected leaders, that we should know who's actually funding their campaigns. And that's what I'll do as the Secretary of State, because I understand how lobbyists have corrupted the system and how elected leaders have went along and created a system that has made it much more difficult for us to get the Arizona that we need.
Well, I'll give you about 90 seconds.
First and foremost, I love the Republican talking point that the cyber ninjas identified an issue that happened during the campaign that I ran. So thank you for making their argument for them. There were no real issues the cyber ninjas identified, and it's disappointing that you would take that tack. The second thing, I think you now have opened the door to lobbyists and financing and corruption. It's very interesting that the organization that you are executive director of has a tax status that does not require that any of its funders be identified. Nobody knows where your paycheck comes from as co-executive director with the rest of your family. Nobody knows where that money is coming from. Nobody knows because you haven't filed your 990s for 2019 or 2020 or 2021. So who's actually paying your paycheck and covering your mortgage and paying for your vehicle? The problem that we have here is that some of our candidates will talk about anti-corruption, and yet they will be sitting, being personally funded through a 501c4 organization that they are the head of, and nobody knows where the money is coming from. It's dark money. And if you don't file your tax paperwork, no one will be able to tell. So you can say all you want about whether I'm interrupting you or whatnot, but please don't come here and talk about corruption. It doesn't bode well for you.
And that was a personal attack, and I want to just be crystal clear here that You are initiating dark money with organizations that are fighting for our community, organizations that have consistently stood up.
Are your funders public? Are your funders public?
Let me be clear.
Are your funders public?
Let me be clear. Because if we want to talk about taxes, we could talk about the 9 years that you have not paid taxes at your home, and you're still delinquent in taxes. So we don't want to talk about taxes. Yeah, you opened the door. So I didn't want to get personal, but you can. Let's be crystal clear about this. The reality is that as elected leaders, we have to lead. We have to make sure that we have the ability to bring people together, and that's what I've done as the top leader in the House, and that's what I'll continue to do as Secretary of State.
The very next question I had right here on my screen was actually about dark money, so thank you guys for people should know that a 501c4 does not have to report its donors, and there's a reason for that. Historically, organizations like the ACLU, during the Civil Rights Unit, a lot of voter rights organizations took advantage of that so that the people who were helping them were not publicly known, put in danger. So is there kind of a dividing line here between possibly good dark money and bad dark money? Adrian, Fontes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there dark money that should not be in our politics? And,
No,
are there organizations that should be able to run that way?
That's a great question, and I think the IRS code is very clear on that, and you're absolutely right. There are folks who, for example, will fund Planned Parenthood Advocacy of Arizona, which is a 501c4. I used to be on the board of directors for that organization. There are plenty of folks who want to have their donations protected. But when it comes to, I think it's a little unseemly if you're an elected official and you've got one of these organizations and you're the executive director of the organization and you're getting paid by the organization and that organization is actually actively campaigning and electioneering for you, that's a little rough. Now, is it a violation of the law? I don't know. That's not an area of law that I'm expert in. But at the end of the day, yeah, if this is to protect the identity of folks who might be under threat, that's fine. But if it's to protect the identities of folks who are influencing your campaign, and you're the executive director, and you're the candidate that that very organization is funding, that's a little problematic. And by the way, the house that I sold in November sold out of escrow with no issue, so I'm not sure I know what Mr. Boulding is talking about when it comes to taxes.
I'll give you a minute to respond, Reginald.
So this is where you have candidates who will do and say anything just to try to get elected. The reality is there's no dark money issues. My organization, what we've done is we've provided COVID relief to families who are being kicked out of their homes. We've provided an opportunity for them to pay their rent, to put food on their table. What we've done is we've provided an opportunity for families who are hungry to have food at the table. We provided opportunities for over 250 young people to actually have a job in their community. Whether you're in Tucson, whether you're in Phoenix, whether you're in Pinal, we provided them with an opportunity. And this idea that, oh, well, dark money is not okay, it's okay if voting says it, but if not, it's not, and the Fair Ballot Initiative is good, except if voting wrote it, then it's not good. Look, this is where you have candidates that will do, and they'll say anything to get elected. Look, the reality is that as the Secretary of State, you have to have someone who has the ability to execute. That's what my job has been over the last 8 years. And that's what I've been delivering at. You also have to have someone who can get elected. I ran 8 elections, won every single one of those elections because I was able to bring people together. And in fact, my district, the demographics don't fit me. Over 60% of my district is Latino. And I'm consistently the top vote getter in that district because the language that I speak working class people who want to get things done. When you look at our primary elections, those are the things that you see. You see myself winning those as a top vote getter. With regards to my opponent, I respect the work that you've done. And in fact, in 2016, I was actually one of the individuals who filed a lawsuit against Helen Purcell, the person who Mr. Fontes succeeded, to help craft the pathway so he could get into office. In fact, my organization, the one that you said is Dark Money and all those other things, we helped elect you to office in 2016. So I find it incredibly disgusting that you would somehow say that we're not providing support for our community. The reality is this. I've won 8 elections by bringing people together. You've ran 2 elections. The first one you won by 0.5%. Not 5%, 0.5%. And the second one you lost. So the reality is this. When you come up here and you throw these jabs and these punches, they don't do anything to help Democrats. They don't do anything to help make sure that we win our elections. And they're not going to do anything to make sure that we protect democracy.
I think it's important that we really look carefully at the results of the 2020 election in LD 27, the results of the 2018 election, and the results of the 2016 election. Look at the numbers. You will see who was the actual top vote getter in that district. And then understand that LD 27, where Mr. Boulding serves in the House of Representatives, is a D plus 35. That means Democrats have a 35% advantage.
What have you done? Can you talk about your
35%, and who's interrupting now?
Okay, you're right.
Has a 35% advantage in Democrats. And he brings up this idea of electability. I may have only won by 0.5%, but the Republicans had an 8.5% advantage in voter registration that year. And in 2020, the Republicans had a 6.5% voter registration advantage in Maricopa County. So when you're talking about electability statewide, you're talking about a candidate who has never run against a Republican ever.
That's not.
And in me, you have a candidate who has beaten the Republican voter registration advantage every time I've run. And I've garnered right around 2.5 million votes on the way to doing this. And so electability isn't just about what happens in a small legislative district in South Phoenix. It's about the entire state of Arizona. And if you're going to have a candidate who's going to help Mark Kelly get reelected and help our gubernatorial candidate, vamos a tener que tener candidatos que pueden comunicar con todos nuestros votantes sobre los valores del Partido Demócrata. Porque es muy importante que podemos comunicar claramente con todos. Electability means we talk to all of our voters. Electability means that we don't say that we're a top vote getter when we're really not. Electability means that you have someone who's willing to fight, who's willing to push, who's willing to never apologize for their passion, particularly when they're defending the work that their team did, even if it was a bipartisan team. That's the kind of candidate that you'll get in me, because we have to maintain that Senate seat. We have to be competitive at the governor's office. And we have to make sure that Mark Finchem and the Republicans don't take this seat. We're facing a constitutional crisis otherwise. And the bottom line is the bottom line. We cannot govern if we do not win. And we have to have a team that can win statewide in Arizona. And having beaten the Republican advantage by bringing in Republicans and independents to win Maricopa County and statistically tie Maricopa County, I'm the candidate that can do that, respectfully. And we have to have strong voices who understand the ins and outs of these systems to call out the independent problems and these particular lies, who understand the bits and pieces, who are going to give you actual points of reference in response to the particular technical questions. We've got to win this one. And the question is, who are we going to have in November facing off against Mark Finchem and the Donald Trump Republicans? Someone who has support of Republicans, or someone who's never run against any?
Reginald Boulding, how do you convince Republicans that our elections work?
You know, in order to ensure that we have a conversation about, bringing people to the table, I think that we have to also recognize that there are some Republicans who, quite frankly, no matter what we say, they're not going to buy into the system. There's some who their entire intent is just to ensure that they cause dysfunction. But I truly believe that there is a portion of Republicans. There is a portion of those folks who may just not know. Because I don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, or independent, we all want fair and secure elections. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that we are calling balls, and strikes. We have to make sure that we're giving people accurate information, that we're allowing them to understand what's true and what's not true. Because what happens when you have disinformation is that travels faster than the truth. So we don't want to be in rooms where we continuously talk about this disinformation, about the audits and the cyber ninjas, because that's what people hear. And then people believe that their elections aren't safe. Their elections aren't secure. Maybe they shouldn't vote. We have to make sure that we're talking to people about issues and about things that actually are accurate, and I think that's going to be important. So what I'm going to do is the same thing I've done in the legislature. I'm going to use my voice, and I'm going to actually get things done. And some people will agree, and some will disagree, but you'll know exactly where I stand. And that's why in a Republican-controlled legislature, with a Republican governor, I've been able to actually pass bills into law. That's a huge feat for anyone who's ever served in a legislature to know. When you're consistently outnumbered in committee, you're outnumbered on the floor, they control the power of the pen, to actually bring people together to change the law in Arizona, that's a difficult thing to do. And that's going to be extremely important here, because the Secretary of State's office, there's certain functions that we have, and there's others that we don't. So when people say that they're running for Secretary of State and they have these big agendas, they also, many times they don't tell you what that office could actually do. Because if we want to have things like automatic voter registration, if we want to make sure that we have things like same-day voter registration, the state legislature is actually the place that can pass that. So you have to have a Secretary of State that can work with both the House and the Senate and the governor's office to actually bring forth a vision to solve problems. Otherwise, the Secretary of State is nothing more than an administrator. And quite frankly, that's not what my vision is for this office. There's so much more that we can do. People, they want more. Every year, the governor gives a State of the State address where he lays out his vision for his budget. The Secretary of Education gives the State of Education. As the next Secretary of State, I'll give the State of Democracy address every year to put forth a pro-vision for how we protect voting rights here. We can no longer afford to stand by and let things happen to us. We have to make sure that we're bringing people together to make things happen for us. And that's my vision as Secretary of State.